Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith to the New York City metropolitan area. Download the app, share it with your friends, and please, wherever you see Joe and I on social media, please help us out. We don't ask for much. We don't ask for money. We just ask for a click, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Hey, that's if you like us and what we do. Hopefully you do, and we'd really appreciate that. Today, we're very excited about this conversation with Jack Cashill. We're going to be talking about the rise and fall of an American city. Now, Joe and I, everybody knows it from Newark, New Jersey. Okay, Jack, back in the day, is from Newark, New Jersey. Okay. But we want to have a broader conversation about, well, everybody talks nowadays about blue cities, blue cities. That's a city that's run by the Democrats and all that. Well, it didn't just happen overnight. And there's a cause of the breakdown of these once great cities, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Newark, whether it's Philadelphia. All right. These places are desolate now. Okay. They're destroyed. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that ethnics, not white people, okay, ethnics, okay, and we'll get into the conversation, left those places, okay, and then those who were in charge decided that they weren't going to do anything to improve those places, and that's what you get now. You have once great cities that are now, like I said, wastelands. So Jack Cashill, welcome to the front line with Joe and Joe.
Hey, Joe and Joe, welcome. Thank you for having me. And by the way,
Absolutely.
before we get too far, tell me about your Newark experiences. What part of town you're from, and when you left.
Mine is very simple. From 1967, when I was born, to 1991, my parents were amongst the last of the families to leave. If we're talking about leaving Newark, we left in 1991. Our Italian-American neighborhood had already been, a lot of people had already moved to the suburbs, whether immediate suburbs like Bloomfield or further out, West Orange, Roseland, places like that. But I grew up in Newark. I'm a product of the Newark public school system in grammar school, then went to Seton Hall Prep and Seton Hall University, like a lot of other kids from Newark and Belleville and that immediate area. All right. And we were all, again, I'm not just, let's say, blindly nostalgic. My brother and I used to talk about it all the time. I wouldn't trade my upbringing in Newark for all the suburbs in the world. We loved growing up there. Okay.
And was that in North Newark or
Newark, Roseville section. I grew up, my father was from the first ward. And then after I was born and my brother was born, we moved up to the Roseville section, which is closer up, going out further west on Bloomfield Avenue, up by St. Francis Church,
Right, sure.
and Newark City School Stadium. And then, and then after a while, and I know we're going to get into it because it's one of the questions, after you get mugged once too often, or your car gets robbed once too often, or your house gets broken into once too often, it comes a point where you say, all right, it's time to go. It's a shame, but that's what it is. Joe Resinello.
Yeah, my family came from that same area. My father was baptized at that same church, St. Francis Xavier. They left immediately after the riots. My grandfather passed away. My father went to Barringer High School. He was a basketball player, actually, second team All City, pretty good basketball player. He went to high school, believe it or not, with Joe Pasillo's dad. Riots happened. He took his mother, moved to Southern Bergen County, and that's where I grew up. But we would always go to dinner there on Bloomfield Avenue. Still do, in fact. So we have those connections. My family, I still have family from there. My parents, my father grew up down the street from Columbus Hospital. In his house, born through a midwife. Hospital, throw a stone, hit the bit from his house. He was in the house. He was born. My grandfather's probably eating pasta at the other side of the table, but that's how Italians roll.
No, right. My neighborhood high school was Barringer, and I didn't go there, but I grew up Catholic, so all my siblings and I went to Catholic high schools. But the Barringer was an interesting part of the world, and a lot of the people I spoke to from my book Untenable went to Barringer, and a lot of them are Italian. Obviously, Barringer is a pretty heavily Italian high school at the time, and you're right. It's a tale of not about white people, because it's not like we didn't think we were white, but we identified with our ethnic group, not with our race growing up. And I grew up in an Irish neighborhood, Irish household, Irish block, in a largely Irish Italian neighborhood, Roseville. And the Catholic Church played a large role in breaking down those ethnic barriers, because when my mother was a little girl, she was born in 1923, she wasn't allowed to play with Italians. When my uncle married an Italian in 1950, it was more, I would say, not scandalous, a little strong, but more controversial than when my niece married a Haitian a few years ago. So it's, we overcame a lot of our ethnic differences through our shared Catholicism, one thing, but also our shared sense of victimhood as we moved into the 60s and 70s, right? We were all facing the same, not enemy, and the enemy wasn't, we knew it wasn't Black people. We knew the enemy was larger than that. It was it was the state. Our enemy was the state. I mean, the state took my house. I mean, that gets really pretty personal when they do that. And by the state, I mean here the government in general, which was almost seemingly consciously trying to destroy our neighborhoods and destroy our cities.
Well, real quick, Jack. Let's stay there for a second. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello, we're going to go way in the breach today. We're talking about the destruction of American cities. Joe and I are from Newark, New Jersey. Jack was born in Newark, New Jersey. Jack, I got to stay along the lines of what you just said. Okay, Joe, it's funny you mentioned Haitians. Joe and I are married to 2 Haitian sisters. Okay,
Huh.
now we say all the time on the show. Okay, we don't have our head in the sand. We don't think everybody just holds hands and sings kumbaya. Okay, we
Right.
recognize that our wives are Black. We married our wives because our wives are Roman Catholic.
Yes.
That's why. If my wife was Protestant of some kind or whatever the case might be, I don't know if I would have married. I don't even know if I would have dated her. Okay, because at the time I was trying to find a nice Catholic girl. Oh, later in life. Okay. We know they're Black, but they're Catholic. When I went to Seton Hall Prep, I didn't know there was like all white people in North Newark, New Jersey. They were all Irish. Didn't matter if you were German. All right, didn't matter what he's an Irish. He's Irish. Okay. I got to Seton Hall Prep. You know how many within the first 6 months I was there, I found out that I'm friends with a lot of these Irish kids because they were all from South Orange and Maplewood and going to Seton Hall Prep, West Orange, all right? And they're Irish Catholic. And their parents are working parents just like mine were. And they said and then you start to learn it ain't about forget about the racial part. It's not even about ethnicity. We were all Catholic, every one of us. And that was what binds us. And I would ask you this. Do you think, okay, and I mentioned it to you before the show, I'll throw it out there, okay? A lot of people, Bill Donahue from the Catholic League, okay? I don't think that he's an extreme example. He called Paul Blanchard's book, which was written in 1949, all right, American Freedom and Catholic Power. He rightfully called it an anti-Catholic screed that targeted Catholic power in America, which was concentrated in the cities, whether it was Newark, whether it was Philadelphia, whether it was Chicago, whether it was Detroit. In other words, there was ethnic power amongst Catholics, okay? And that was a deliberate target. And a lot of people say, a lot of the people, what we call now the deep state, might have been involved in that. And again, I know that was a little bit of a diatribe. Jack Cashill, talk about that if you don't mind.
Well, I've heard that thesis, and based on my own experience, my own research, I don't buy it. And just look at a city like Newark, for instance. They put 2 highways through, 2 interstates. 280 took my neighborhood, but 78 took out Weequahic, the Jewish neighborhood.
That's right. Yeah.
In fact, the Jewish neighborhood, Weequahic, which was one of the most powerful and productive Jewish neighborhoods in the world, let alone America. It produced, 20 people we've all heard of. But it was vulnerable in ways that Catholic neighborhoods weren't, because Catholic neighborhoods had Catholic schools. Jewish neighborhoods, Jews never thought to build their own schools because they depended on public schools, which under their purview were good because they were filled with Jewish teachers. And they had a very high standards for their students. So at Barringer, I don't mean to insult our Italian-American friends, but your educational standards weren't as high as they were at Weequahic, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So your parents were willing to tolerate more than they were at Weequahic, where once those schools started going down just a little bit, those neighborhoods emptied. And the irony is that the Jews in Weequahic were far more accepting at least theoretically, of interracial relations in the 60s and 70s than were Italians or the Irish, right? But they were the first ones to leave. And they vacated that neighborhood remarkably quickly. And so for instance, in 1958, there were only a handful of blacks in Weequahic High School. By 1970, there were only a handful of Jews, literally a handful. That's how quick that was. Whereas
I want to
Barron
explore, Jack, what you said about the state. You said the state. That's interesting because I do think that there are policies in place currently, not just in Newark, but across America that are hurting the people. For instance, the lack of charter schools. Newark graduates 3 out of 10 kids. The school system, I mean, if you're in business and you have a 30% chance of success, you're out of business.
The only business where you could go 3 out of 10 and be an all-star is baseball.
And
about it.
The cost per student is well over $30,000.
Right.
And that's across the board through many cities, Baltimore, Memphis. We could go on and on and on. These kids have no chance of getting out of poverty. It's the greatest example of systemic racism out there. Tim Scott even addressed it in his recent presidential run. He said that the NEA has to be abolished. That is a radical statement. But at the end of the day, that is a state instituted policy across the board in Newark. It's a failure. It's gone on for decades. What are your thoughts, not just on that policy, but other policies that the state have put forth that have absolutely devastated people in these cities?
Well, in looking at it, what happened in a city like Newark and happened in cities all over the country is that dreamers sort of unwittingly colluded with the schemers, right? So, for instance, the dreamers actually believed in high-rise public housing. The schemers were looking at demolition contracts and building contracts, and they were willing to bulldoze their own neighborhoods as they did in Little Italy, which was a shocking, bit of ethnic self-destruction there. And so there are various policies in place that unwittingly sort of came together to destroy the cities. One is the control of public education by the teachers union. You're absolutely right. We were not allowed to reform the schools. The reform of the schools would have come through allowing them to be privatized, be charterized, have kids go to Catholic schools on vouchers or scholarships. And that's the first thing that they shut down. First thing Obama did when he took office in 2009 was to end the policy in D.C. that the Republicans had implemented, where kids could compete for scholarships to private schools. First thing he did, because he was beholden to the teachers' unions.
Boom.
They were the single largest and most powerful constituency within the Democratic Party. In Newark, probably the most destructive, and across the country, public policy was the subsidization of fatherlessness, the encouragement of fatherlessness. And Black homes were hit particularly hard by this. I mean, some white homes have been hit too, and especially even in rural America. But that was the catalyst for the quick destruction of cities like Newark. Was that?
Wait. Go ahead, Jack. I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Joe. Yeah.
No, but here's my thing, though. Now, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of Black people left Newark.
Of course they did.
I mean, Newark had all union jobs. When you talk about Newark, my father used to tell me Newark had 16 breweries. Those are all blue-collar jobs. You have a major port, the port of Newark, all the longshoremen that work down there, all the Teamsters, okay? What were they, all white guys working for these? A lot of Black guys worked in these unions too, making, at the time, $20, $30, and $40 an hour with health benefits and everything. Well, they left too. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jack. They went to East Orange. They went to the suburbs. They went to other places. Am I wrong about that? Because a lot of people always want to make this all seem about race. Michelle Obama did that. I mean, it's all about white flight, you racist white people. Well, a lot of Black people left Newark and other cities too. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jack Cashill.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, Michelle is the greatest hypocrite on this subject because her family fled the neighborhood where she was born because of the housing projects came. So they fled to a neighborhood that was still transitioning out of being Jewish and then transitioned very quickly. And then when they were ready for high school, Michelle's mother took a job so she could send her son to a Catholic high school, right? And then she sent Michelle and like an hour plus bus ride downtown to a magnet school that the mayor of Chicago now wants to close because it's selective, right? That's how bad that policy is. But in Newark, the like I said earlier, the Catholics tended to resist that, even Black Catholics. Now, the one story I tell in Untenable, my book on the true story of white ethnic flight from America's cities, is that of the Houston family. Whitney Houston's father is a classic case. He comes up from the South in the Great Migration when men were expected to work, and they had to work because if they didn't work, they starved. And where they not only worked, but they married, they stayed married, and they raised families. Whitney's father worked in the Singer sewing foundry during the Depression, made enough of a living to support her and her mother and her mother's 7 siblings. Her mother marries a guy from my neighborhood, John Houston. They moved to an area in the Weequahic area. She's talking about what a quiet, peaceful little village she lives in. And then she says the crime starts and the drugs start. And then in 1967, the riots come. And then she says to John Houston, her husband, this is Sissy Houston, says, we've got to get out of here. And you're right, Joe. They moved to East Orange as soon as they could, and they buy a house there. They're not going to stick around for this. Because they're subject to the same forces that we were subject to.
Yeah, if listen, you ever take a ride down Center Street from 280 down to Seton Hall University, and you ride through some of those neighborhoods in East Orange and Orange, those houses are beautiful.
Yeah,
those houses are enormous and they're beautiful. That's an immediate suburb of Newark. It's like the Forest Hill section of Newark, okay, where those houses are all big and beautiful. Well, guess who bought those homes in the 1970s and the 1980s in East Orange and Orange? Black people.
Right.
Black people leaving Newark. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we have Jack Cashill. We're discussing the rise and fall of an American city, but then beyond just Newark, New Jersey, we're talking about cities in general. Jack, one more time, Untenable is the book that you wrote on this topic. What's the subtitle?
It is called The True Story. I keep forgetting myself. The True Story of White Ethnic Flight from America's Cities. Because why I use the word ethnic is because it was not like we white people fled. It was ethnic groups fled, and all at a different pace and for a different, not all for the same reason, but at a different pace and to different places and with different outcomes, different consequences.
Yeah.
And the problem in a city like Newark, for working class people like my parents and all my friends, is that when we had to leave, the close-in suburbs were taken. They were too expensive. We couldn't move to South Orange or West Orange. You know, my friends all moved down the shore, and the shore sounds more glamorous than it is up close. We're talking about these slapdash suburbs built 10 miles from inland from the shore, out of the pine barrens and the scrublands. And in a book, I tell about my own experiences there, which were incredibly disheartening because we left behind perfectly functional, wonderful neighborhoods, often built around the church and school, you know, with mom and pop shops running up and down our streets. My main street was Orange Street. You guys probably Bloomfield Avenue. For others, it was South Orange Avenue. And when I went back and talked to, I must have interviewed 50 people from that world and from other cities as well. But the word that keeps coming up about our neighborhood, which would seem bizarre in retrospect, is idyllic. You know, in 1960, I lived in an idyllic neighborhood. By 1975, it was untenable. You couldn't live there. And I got the title from a friend of mine, a good friend. Most of my friends, virtually everyone, by the way, who was affected by this phenomenon, turned Republican. You know, we grew up in Democratic neighborhoods and turned Republican. But my one friend remained a Democrat, partly because he was from a union family. And I asked him, you know, I had a bunch of guys together I hadn't seen in a long time. We were talking about it. And I said to him, Marty, I said, why finally did you leave our block? You were the last guy to leave our block. In my case, the highway took my house, but he remained on the other end of the block. And he said, well, Jack, it became, and he's searching for the right word, untenable. And I said, what does it mean? What does untenable mean? He goes, well, you know, when your mother gets mugged for the second time, that's untenable. When your home gets invaded for the second time, that's untenable. Anyone who did not leave was a fool or a masochist under those circumstances. Now, unfortunately, crime had a racial face because essentially all the street crime, let's face it, you guys know that there's crime that is that blacks do not have a monopoly on crime in Newark, but street crime, yeah, it was virtually 100% black on white. At least we're all white. We experience it that way. Blacks who were more victimized by we were did not experience it as a racial thing, but as a cultural thing. They knew. And I talk about this one great book I integrate into my story was written by a kid who grew up in Columbus Homes, black kid, and one of the first people to move into the buildings when they were wonderful. And then he talks about what he saw around him, and it was black on black in his case, and it was destructive. Then finally, they were forced to make the same kind of decisions that his neighbors in Little Italy were forced to make, or the North End Italians. We got to move.
Yeah, I mean, I remember like when I was a kid, my Uncle Danny owned a pizzeria / ice cream shop down on 7th Avenue, going close to downtown. Because my father, my family is from the First Ward, closer down that way. They built the projects across the street. And my Uncle Danny had just a little store, right? A little pizzeria, right? Got robbed maybe 3 or 4 times. I remember when I was a kid, he told my father, he said, "Well, can't do that anymore. You can't do it. You're risking your life just to try to make a living,
Right.
or just walking down the street." And again, that's one of the things that bothers me, Jack Cashill, is like when people want to try to couch this about race. How many black people have been destroyed by these policies that, ever since this so-called white flight took place? Well, none of this is improved. Ross Baraka has not improved anything. Cory Booker before him didn't improve anything. Sharp James didn't improve anything. Ken Gibson didn't improve anything. And for those of you who don't know who those people are, probably know who Cory Booker is, all right? Those are the last 4 mayors of Newark, New Jersey. It's what T.S. Eliot would call the wasteland. That's what Newark is. So it's not even benefiting the black people.
No, you don't benefit black people by tearing down a statue of Christopher Columbus and replacing it with George Floyd, which was what Newark did, which is the tearing down of the Columbus statue, which was a gift from the Italian community to Newark 100 years ago, was just appalling. And then they just threw it away. They said they were going to put it in storage. And my cousin, who's still a cop in Newark, and he's half Italian, he knows that world. He said they just threw it by the side of 280, left it there, right?
Yeah.
And the other Columbus, you know about the story of the other Christopher Columbus statue by St. Francis?
Can I tell you that story?
Yeah, tell me that, because
I'm driving down the street a couple minutes before we got to take a break. I'm driving down the street and all this is going on, and in my head, I just was curious about that statue. I was like, I was like saying to my wife, I wonder if they're going to target that statue, because they had already a couple weeks prior taken down the one downtown that you just talked about.
Right.
Okay, so they got to that one first. So my wife and I were this was during COVID, by the way.
Right.
We got in the car. I wasn't working. I was unemployed for 3 months. Got in the car and we were going somewhere, and I said, you know what? Just for the hell of it, let's take a ride through Newark. Jack, my hand to God, this is a true story. All right. So I said, I'm just curious. So we're driving down 8th Street, down towards Bloomfield Avenue, where St. Francis Church is. Okay.
Right.
And I said to my wife on the way down, I said, I just want to see if that statue's still there. As we're driving down, I'm seeing all the yellow lights from tow trucks and flatbeds and all that stuff. And the statue was coming down. It was being taken down. Now, I was outraged. I did a video at the moment that went viral on Facebook, okay? And I was wrong. I have to admit, I was wrong. I thought it was the city of Newark taking it down, okay? And in fact, it was Buddy Fortunato from the Italian Tribune,
Right.
Okay, Asa Lagna's son-in-law, that the family took the statue down, okay?
To protect it, to save it.
To protect it and save it, right?
Right.
After they saw what happened to what happened to the one downtown, they took it down. In fact, I got a phone call saying, "Hey, Joe, your heart was in the right place, but you were wrong. Buddy took that statue down to protect it." And I think it's in the suburbs now One of my cousins told me that it's somewhere in like, Morris County. They put it up somewhere else. So that's my story about that statue.
No, that's true. That's I got the inside story on that too, and but I didn't get to witness it. That must have been really freaky to see it happening.
Well,
You know?
I was there and I didn't know what was going on. And I automatically assumed, because when you were looking what happened, what was going on in Ohio and all these other places where the statue's coming down, I'm automatically assuming that it's the city of Newark that's taking it down. Okay. And that's another thing you could get into too, is the double standard. But let's start another question. I'm going to hand it over to Joe before the break.
I want to bridge on the other side the riots that took place in Newark to what we saw in the summer of 2020. In my family, my mother's uncle was a cop, Johnny Tarosa, a corrupt cop, got thrown off the force. He used to drive for the mob, and he was a cop. He would always talk about the riots. How they started was the poet was arrested. You correct me if I'm wrong, Jack. And then the riots began. And then we saw riots in this summer, the summer of 2020. Let's talk about that, because Newark never recovered, and I don't think many cities are going to recover from those riots.
That's right. Newark was the prototype. It was the first big riot in a major northeastern city. By the way, my father was a cop. My uncle was a cop. Several of my cousins are Newark cops. So I know the story well. My uncle, in fact, was there defending the 3rd precinct, the one that was under siege. It started a lot, in a sense. I should say I have 2 chapters in the book. One is called The Rebellion, and the other is called The Riots. And the rebellion is how Amiri Baraka, the father of the current Newark mayor, the poet, he and his friend, every conceivable black radical was passing through Newark at that time. It was like the Casablanca of strange radicals. And they've sowed the ground for a year or two. Not just black radicals either. Tom Hayden of the SDS, the bride of Jane Fonda, was there for 4 years, preparing the groundwork for this riot. What set the riot off, which was somewhat spontaneous, was the false report that the cops had killed this cab driver, John Smith. He was the George Floyd of '67. In fact, Floyd, this guy he attacked a couple of cops. He was resisting arrest. They had to carry him into the precinct. So many incidents start over. Resisting arrest always looks ugly. There's no good way to subdue someone who's resisting arrest. Fortunately, this was before video cameras, but the rumor spread that they killed him, and that's how it started. And then
Jack, let's leave it there for
the 3rd precinct there.
Jack, let's leave it there for 1 second. Let's take a quick break, and we're fascinated by the story. Want to know more about it, because I don't think a lot of people know about the Newark riots. But if you're just joining us here at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, Jack Cashill, we're discussing the rise and fall of an American city, specifically Newark, New Jersey. But the topic is obviously going broader than that, to talk about American cities in general. Jack, one more time, your book is Untenable, the subtitle?
The True Story of White Ethnic Flight from America's Cities, available. I'd say go to Amazon, because that's where publishers keep score nowadays.
All right, so please go out and buy the book if you want to know, what's going on, on this topic. So Jack has written the book, and we encourage everybody to go out there and buy it. So stick around here at the Veritas Catholic Radio Network. We have another great segment with Jack Cashill. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. We're weighing the breach with Jack Cashill. We're talking about the rise and fall of an American city, specifically Newark, New Jersey, but we're also, broadening the conversation, because obviously what happened in Newark applies to what happened to a lot of other American cities. So Newark had riots back in 1967, the Summer of Love, ironically enough. Jack.
That's right.
There was not a lot of love going on. I was born right after that. In October '67, but I'm going to hand it over to Jack. But Jack ended the last segment talking about the riots. The radicals were there. Tom Hayden, Jane Fonda's wife, was there. I said that deliberately. A lot of other black radicals. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jack. Huey Newton and others were there too. Correct?
Stokely Carmichael was there, who was very popular at the time. Aron Karenga, the founder of Kwanzaa, was there. Right. He founds Kwanzaa, and then he goes to prison a couple years later for kidnapping and torturing a couple of black women, which is I think Kris Kringle did that too, didn't he? Maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah. Well,
The
go ahead. You were talking about how there was a resisting arrest, cab driver got hauled into the precinct. Please continue, Jack.
Yeah, this is how so many riots. There's a flashpoint, but it's all been prepared for, right? Um, I talk a lot about Anthony Imperiale in the book, who was the sort of fiery Italian ethnic nationalist leader, and he was considered racist, horrible person. But Amiri Baraka, who is the real pot stirrer for all of this, the father of the mayor of Newark now, Ras Baraka, was the guy most responsible for making this happen. And he wrote a very interesting memoir about it, which is oddly candid. He went to Barringer. He grew up in our neighborhood, right? An integrated neighborhood. And just, loving two-parent family, both working, right? Great migration people. And it's just, he fell off his problem was he went to college, right? No one in my neighborhood was going to college, but he went to college and got his head turned. He got multiple scholarships out of Barringer High School. This is in 1950. I mean, this is the world that they paint about growing up Black in the cities was not a complete picture of what it was really like.
Well, that's why we have you here, Jack.
Yeah.
But I want to throw I want to just transcend race for a second and talk about, like you just mentioned several radical leftists. That's what they are, whether it's Stokely Carmichael, Ron Karenga, whether it's on the Caucasian side, Tom Hayden. These are radicals stirring the pot. Problem with the whole narrative about Anthony Imperiale, okay, is that Amiri Baraka is the type of guy, because he's a radical leftist. Forget about the color of his skin. He's a radical leftist. Is that when they punch you in the face, they expect you to just cave in and just continue to let them just do what they want because they're radical leftists. And Imperiale was the guy who said, no. If you come across Park Avenue, okay, anybody coming into our neighborhood that's going to try to spread this riot into, let's say, the First Ward, the North Ward, and come down, we're going to defend our neighborhood. That's a natural and normal thing to do, okay? And by the way, when I was a little baby, go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I portray Imperiale positively in the book because it also speaks to the different way ethnic groups reacted to the pressures they were under. The Jews fled. I mean, I don't blame them, but they were the first ones out. The Irish were kind of somewhere in between, but the Italians fought, right? They resisted. And, you can't fault them for doing that, but you were faulted no matter what you did. If you resisted, you were a racist. If you fled, you were a racist. There was no good alternative. And even Blacks who did respond to the same way were since given a pass on racist, but that didn't help them with their lives at all, because they were the ones at the front line suffering the most from what basically happened in the riot. In the Kerner report, these things pointed out, is that the percentage of fatherless children had grown to the point where they were taking down whole neighborhoods. Where it had been like in 1950, like 80-90% of Black kids were living in two-parent families. By the mid 60s, that was down to 70%. Today, it's down to about 20-25%. You just need one bad kid in a block to bring the block down, but you have a block filled with fatherless children. You can't control it. The boys are going to set the standards for the neighborhood, and they unfortunately do and did. So, I mean, that is the one great problem that no one wants to talk about. It is the problem, and it's still the problem, and it's more of a problem now than it was even then.
But isn't that the problem across all families right now? It's 1 in 2 get divorced. 40% of American children are born outside of wedlock.
Right.
I have 5 kids. My parents were married 52 years. My father was a barber in Belleville. I mean, they got married, stayed married. That's the key to success. It's the key to success in life, period. My parents weren't educated. They sent me to college. They sent my brother to college. They owned a house. It can be done, but no one talks about that. And in my view, why? Because staying married isn't easy. Life is hard. God helps you to do it. We take God out of the picture. Frankly, marriage has fallen apart.
Joe, let me
That's
ask Jack, if you don't mind, I want to throw this over to Joe and then to you. I have an idea. I want both of your comments on it, if that's okay. All right. Joe said earlier that they destroyed these cities. Okay. You drive through Newark, New Jersey now. It ain't any better than it was 30 years ago. Okay.
That's right.
When supposedly there was all this white flight. All right. Joe, you said these cities aren't coming back. Okay. But if let's say for argument's sake, let's face it, the main victims of these policies in this inner city are African Americans. I think that's as plain as day. Okay. Where African Americans in America step up, and they're going to have to change a lot of the nonsense that's going on. You mentioned, Jack, teachers unions, the power that they have. All right. Start shaming these young men into marrying the women that they've impregnated and raising their children. A lot of things that can be done if African Americans in these cities would step up and start to demand better. I would love both your comments. Am I completely off base? Jack, I'll start with you and then I'll go over to Joe.
Sure. The other Joe's last comment was the thesis of my book. I mean, in a nutshell. Here's the opportunity we had in 2009. And I'll tell you the story because I talk about this in the book. In 2008, Barack Obama gives a talk on Father's Day in the south side of Chicago at a church. Democrats are allowed to speak at church without worrying about church-state separation. And he makes the kind of speech Joe, you'd hope he'd make. He says the real problem in our neighborhoods is that men are acting like boys and abandoning their families. And then he goes through a litany of consequences. Fatherless children, boys without fathers are 5 times more likely to drop out of school, 10 times more likely to get arrested, 20 times more likely to go to prison, et cetera, up and down the list, right? And the media are not sure what to make of this because he's saying what you or I would want him to say, or Alan Keyes would have said, or George Bush wouldn't have thought to say it, but good conservative Christians would have said. And then 2 weeks later on a hot mic in a Fox News studio, not knowing he was being recorded, allegedly, Jesse Jackson says, and I'm going to use the exact words he says, and he makes a slashing motion with his hand while he's saying it. Barack Obama, he talking down to black people, I want to cut his nuts out, right? So literally what he said. Mm-hmm. And then he used the N-word and some other stuff. That was the last we ever heard from Barack Obama about the one thesis that he was better capable of explaining than anyone before or since. The first black president, he had the opportunity, Joe, just to do exactly what you said. Bring that message to the community and say, we've got to turn this around. We're the only ones who could do it. But he refused, he failed, chickened out. I can understand why he chickened out. But Jesse Jackson grew up on a farm. He knows what he's talking about. But that was it. Barack Obama. Yeah. Now it's very difficult for someone in a lesser position to enforce that kind of thinking.
Well, Joe Rossinello, do you honestly think that there's no hope, or do you think that there's at some point some sort of paradigm shift could take place in these cities that could bring in policies? I mean, this is something more social and culture when you talk about fatherlessness, but also the political policies, the education system. I mean, Joe, is it hopeless?
Where there's God, there's always hope. But ultimately, it's very difficult for families to break generational behaviors. I mean, you have 4th generation single moms. This is what these families know. We're seeing this now across America. How do you do that? The church has to be strong. People have to go to the church and hear the message. They have to see with their own eyes people just like themselves, both white and black, who are successful in marriage, raising kids together, man and woman, successful. Don't have to be educated, just have to work hard, love each other, love God, love your family, love your neighbor. Then things grow. You can't legislate morality. Morality can't be legislated. It's not with words, it's with example, and God gives you the strength to do it. Ultimately, there lies the solution. The rest of it is just words and social activism. And frankly, we've had 5 decades of that in Newark and in cities like Baltimore, in Memphis, in East St. Louis. Nothing has helped. And these politicians haven't helped. Jack, what do you think?
No, Joe, I totally agree with you. And I'll say what's made it worse for today than it was 50 years ago is that today, for the last 10, 15, 20 years in schools and through the media, especially since the rise of Barack Obama, young Black kids are being told that their problem isn't their problem. It's their problem is because they're being oppressed, that they're part of a system, this whole critical race theory that you are, the white people are your oppressors and you are the victims of that oppression. So when you do a flash mob robbery on a Nike store, you're just liberating those goods from the oppressive capitalist patriarchy. They believe this. They've had this pounded into their heads instead of being taught, like if they had gotten, and this is where Catholic education could come in handy, going to Catholic school and being taught a genuine sense of morality and respect and responsibility. That's not happening in their schools. Schools are reinforcing the message they get through the media. And it's, I don't know where it ends. I'd like to think that it ends someplace positive also, but it's going to take a real reawakening. I mean, a literal reawakening, a great awakening, like the fourth great awakening, a great Christian awakening to turn things around.
But doesn't that require people like us, Jack Cashill, joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe? Doesn't that require people like us? I'm not going to say that. I mean, I moved to Arizona 2 years ago. I don't live in Southern Bergen County anymore or any place close to Newark. But just leaving, I'm not necessarily talking about myself in particular, but just in general. When do we start shaming the Jesse Jacksons of the world as a group? I'm not talking about as a racial group. I'm talking about as let's call it more conservative minded people, if you want to put it like that. Okay. People that know that the policies that are implemented, if you even want to dignify them by calling them policies in the inner city, are what's destroying the cities. When do we shame the Jesse Jacksons? We shame the Al Sharptons. We shame the Ross Barakas. We say you're the ones oppressing your people. Don't blame me. I get up every day. I go to work. I don't have a lot of money. I got to raise a wife. I have to support my wife and my son. Okay. Don't blame me. Don't blame race. Blame yourselves. You power hungry leftists. Okay. In bed with teachers unions and others who keep all these people in chains. If you tell a single mom in the inner city, like Joe said, you don't have to be educated to know that something's wrong. That mother knows her kid's not getting educated. Yet if that kid goes to Central High School, Ross Baraka and the state of New Jersey, they say, when she says, well, how about you give me a voucher for half the money that you're spending now, and I'll send my kid to St. Benedict's, and he's guaranteed to graduate from St. Benedict's. Okay. Because that's how good they do. And it'll save the taxpayer $14,000 a year. Okay. And they say, shut up, go back into your, I don't even want to call it at home. Shut up and don't open your mouth. That's what Ross Baraka and Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and people like that, the Black liberal establishment, what I always call on the show, Jack, the Black liberal Uncle Tom establishment, because all they do is they do the bidding of the white liberals. That's all they do.
Well, that's an excellent question, Joe. And to your point, I would say I'm an optimist. I see a slight turning just to that point, your ability to speak out and have the power of your own speech restored to you, because we've been, frightened for so long of saying anything out of line. And I'll give some credit to a gentleman who was born just when you were, also in Newark. You may not know this, who is now the most popular podcaster in the world, is Joe Rogan. His father was a Newark cop. And like so many people in Newark, he was half Irish and half Italian in that generation. I think Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter will be remembered, ideally, if things, unless they reverse it, as the turning point in terms of the restoration of free speech. And it's empowering people to speak up again. So many of our allies have been, including virtually every Republican in Congress, have been tongue-tied on this issue from the beginning, and partly because they have no experience with it. And so I felt like I could go out and say, I've been speaking to, this, I've been saying this for the last 60 years, since I was old enough to write, to talk. And I was always like alone, and no one, but my power comes from my street cred. I mean, I was there. I saw this. I know what I'm talking about. So if like a Ibrahim Kendi tries to contradict me, I'll say, you don't know what you're talking about. I've seen
Absolutely.
more than you've seen, right? This is where age comes a certain wisdom, maybe. I don't know. But I've always been outspoken on this subject. I now find that I have people who are willing to join me in the discussion.
Well, Jack, just what you're saying basically says to me, it's not about people, it's about power. You see, that's kind of how I see this. I don't see it as a black and white issue. I see it as a power issue. And there are many people, frankly, who are black, in fact, most of which who are black, who are suffering because of this power grab in the neighborhoods that got burned down, where stores are never going back. You go to like where West Side High School is. I was just there on Sunday, actually, for a nativity show at the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. Block after block after block abandoned, has been for decades and decades. It's about power. Forget about you. You're not part of the equation. I don't care. They don't care. I want mine. You get nothing. Give me your vote. Give me your vote and sit back down. And that's being said across the board. If you ask me, to this country, we have to get our country back. All of us.
I think you're seeing some, especially among black males, some understanding of how they've been used and exploited for the last 60 or so years, and thus their numbers, and as Trump, among Trump polling support, are increasing to the point they're beginning to worry the people who've controlled their votes for, since LBJ. I think people are wising up. It's going to take a lot of wising up because it's a big problem to solve, but it's possible, and I remain hopeful.
Let me ask you
Joe,
this.
I just want to say one more thing.
Ahead,
you said something
Joe.
about the reawakening. That is it in a nutshell. I'm going to be truthful with you. I don't claim to be the smartest person on the block, but my eyes are open, and it has everything to do with the reawakening. When you're honest with yourself, it begins with me. It begins with me looking in the mirror. Where am I off, and how can I do better? Me, Joe Resinello. It's a reawakening of America. And that is how the cities come back. That is how the country comes back. That is how we take responsibility for ourselves and our family. And then it grows. Outside of that, it's just talk. It's nothing but talk, nothing but empty activism.
Joe, let me ask you this, and I'm gonna, because you just triggered a thought in my head. I'm gonna hand it over to Jack also. Okay, what are the things I think that we could do that dispels the whole racial narrative that's always proposed by the left, is to say, I'm not going back to Newark. I don't have some idea that all of a sudden ethnic Catholics, Italians, are gonna all of a sudden repopulate North Newark, New Jersey. My concern is for the people that live there. The people that live there are largely African American and Hispanic. Okay. So why am I speaking out? If I'm such a scumbag racist that they want to make me out to be, then why would I care about Newark? Why would I care about Detroit? Why would I care about Chicago? My attitude, if I was a racist, let them kill each other. Who cares? We are speaking up because we love these people. Okay, they're being wrecked by, like you mentioned, Joe Resinello, power hungry people who simply just want their vote. Let's be clear about that. They just want these people to keep voting for them. Okay, and they throw them a crumb or two. I mean, I think that the message just in and of itself, guys like us speaking up, saying, wait a minute, we're speaking out because we care about these people and we're tired of the chains that you put them in. You're the ones who are the racists, not us. Your thoughts, both of you.
No, I agree with you on this, is that every individual today in America has the potential to be his own publisher. Even if it's just spreading message on Facebook or Instagram or wherever, you have an audience. And we've been too shy about saying what has to be said. Now, there's ways to couch it in to be politics so that your niece doesn't run out at Thanksgiving dinner and never talk to you again, because these people don't know anything, and most of them don't want to know anything. It's remarkable how little they know and how hostile they are to new information. You've seen that. You know what I'm talking about. And we all have family members where we've got to dance around them, and we still have to dance around them. But we can't say nothing. And I think the next few years will present us opportunities where something has to be said. And it's like, it's like getting mugged by reality. That expression was a metaphorical expression, is how to, like what's a neoconservative is a liberal who've been mugged, right? I mean, that is one way to do it. You don't want to have to do it that way. But as long as we remain silent in the face of the tyranny we're living under now, the social tyranny we're living under now, including on subjects like faith, we empower the tyrants.
Well, that's one of the things that we Joe and I have said on the show a lot, Jack Cashill, is that why would the left be so, when they have Google, they have Meta/Facebook, okay? They have YouTube. We're talking about multi-trillion-dollar market cap. Why are you getting so bent out of shape? Because this guy, Elon Musk, is buying Twitter for $50 billion. $50 billion is nothing compared to Facebook. But you guys got all bent out of shape. Gee, I wonder why. And I got a prediction over the next 5 to 10 years. X, I'm going to stop calling it Twitter because it's now X. Okay. X is going to be a $500 billion to $1 trillion company. You want to know why? For no other reason. Okay. Or I'll give you two reasons. One is Elon Musk is smart. Okay. And the second is what you said, Jack Cashill. I want to be able to speak. I want to be able to speak and be heard. Now, if nobody listens to the front line with Joe and Joe, so be it. It's a free market. If they think we're a couple of jamokes from Newark, New Jersey, so be it. Okay. But in the meantime, it gives us the opportunity to open our mouths. And you want to know what? People listen. Why? Because we're so smart? No, because people need to be encouraged, Jack Cashill. They need to be encouraged by people like you, hopefully by people like us, by people who are willing to say, look, call BS on all this nonsense. I don't care anymore. Jesse Jackson's going to call me a racist no matter what, whether I open my mouth. So I might as well open my mouth. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I know you're absolutely right. And that's where it starts. I'll give you an example. A negative example is that, maybe 6 months ago, I was offered to be on a panel discussing reparations, right? And this was in Kansas City where I live. And I have some degree of visibility here. And this was it was televised on a local PBS station, et cetera. There were 3 Black people on the pro-reparation side. I quickly volunteered. Yeah, I'll do it. Happy to do it, right? And then they had the hardest time finding a second person to be on my side, right? No one wanted to do it. And now we're arguing against something that's a slam dunk. You don't even have to think hard to just tell people why this is a bad idea. But finally, they did get a local talk radio guy who was, on tenterhooks the whole time, as was the moderator. I just had fun. I enjoyed it, right? And I think I got a little respect from the audience because I had fun with it. I was talking to them like I'm talking to you, just like, Rev, are you kidding? But once you do that, once you break through, once you have an audience that doesn't want to hear what you're saying, then they have to think about it. And that scares a lot of people. They don't want to have to entertain the fact that they've been proposing horrible ideas for half a century. So it takes a while to get them used to it. But I think it's always good to come into it with a good spirit and have fun and to try not to step on too many toes. But
you know what would be hysterical if Joe Resinello and I were invited to be on a panel discussion with Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi. I would go there with a smile on my face from ear to ear. I wouldn't be the normal angry Joe P. I would be smiling because, like you said, go into it with some humor and take down their nuts. As Joe Resinello, we got about 2 minutes left.
Courage begins with the audience of one, in my view. It begins with the audience of one. I am who I am in the eyes of God alone. I have to live with me. And I think people have to look at it that way. I love everybody, but at the same time, the truth applies to everybody equally. And we have to be courageous. But our strength, if you ask me, has to come from God. And it's there, and people have done it. And those are the people that change the world. They change the world, and it can be done again. Your thoughts, Jack? You're from Newark. You could change the world. There's no question in my mind.
I
Jack,
can change a little bit of it. Yeah,
Jack, we
you're
got
right.
about a minute.
You look at
Jack,
someone
we got
like
about 1
Paul.
minute left. Just to give you a heads up, we got about 1 minute left.
Right. Look what Paul did in the first century AD, right? He changed the world, right? With Jesus and Paul, two most influential people in the history of the world. You can do it. We've had 3 great awakenings in American history. We need a 4th. You're absolutely right, Joe. And sign me up when it's ready to start.
Hey, well, listen, Jack, look, you've been doing it for a long time. Joe and I are new to this game. We started doing this in 2018. I will tell you this, okay? We're not the most courageous guys in the world. I would say, speaking for myself, I'm one of the Lord's least courageous people, okay? However, I do recognize what's important. I do recognize what's right and what's wrong. And with so much of what's going on in America, and we could have you back, Jack, to talk about a lot of other things, okay? But this is a major problem. This is a major problem for a major segment of our brothers and sisters, our American brothers and sisters living in these swamps, okay, of inner cities, and they've been caused, okay, and they could be turned around. And that's why we're glad that you came on the show, Jack, to have this conversation about the rise and fall of an American city. We spoke primarily about Newark. Jack Cashill, one more time, the book, the subtitle, where folks could buy it.
The book is called Untenable, and it's the true story of white ethnic flight from America's cities. And there's probably different places you could buy it. I recommend Amazon because that's where my publisher keeps score. So the more purchases you buy and the more reviews you post, the better off I am. You know.
All right, Jack Cashill, thank you so much for coming on the front line with Joe, and you're welcome back here anytime, brother.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you guys. Good to have a couple of people who use word like Fanuc in the middle of a sentence. You know, I don't hear
Nice.
that.
Gotta love it. And thank you all out there for joining us on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, 1350 on your AM dial, 103.9 on your FM dial, spreading the truth of the Catholic faith in the New York City metropolitan area. Thanks once again. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.